There is a version of you that nothing can touch. Not the criticism, not the betrayal, not the rejection, not the loss, not the thousand small frustrations that pile up on an ordinary Tuesday and make you feel like the world is quietly working against you. That version of you already exists. It has always existed. But most people spend their entire lives never finding it, not because they lack intelligence or willpower, but because they were never shown where to look. The Stoics looked inward. 2,000 years ago, a man named Epictetus, who began his life as a literal slave, with no freedom, no property, and no guarantee of tomorrow, developed a philosophy so powerful that Roman emperors studied it. Not because it made life easier, but because it made life unbreakable. His central insight was almost offensively simple. You cannot control what happens to you. You can control everything about how you respond. That gap between what happens and how you respond is where your entire life is decided. Today we are going to walk through 10 principles drawn from that philosophy. But I am not going to hand you a list of quotes and call it wisdom. Anyone can copy and paste Epictetus. What I want to do is show you what these principles actually look like in the modern world, in your job, your relationships, your inbox, your arguments, your 3 a.m. spirals, and what it costs you every day you don't live by them. Let's begin. Principle 1. Find your firm purpose. Imagine two people wake up on the same Monday morning. Same alarm. Same commute. Same difficult boss. Same pile of emails. The first person drags through the day reacting, frustrated by the traffic, irritated by the meeting, deflated by the feedback, exhausted by the small injustices that accumulate like water damage. The second person moves through the same exact day like a ship with a compass. The storms exist. They feel them. But they don't drift. The difference is not talent or circumstance. It is purpose. Epictetus said that difficulty reveals character. But here is what that really means in practice. When you have no clear sense of what you are building your life toward, every obstacle feels like a personal attack. Every setback becomes existential. You are not just stuck in traffic. You are losing your life to traffic. You are not just receiving criticism. You are being invalidated as a person. Without purpose, everything is an emergency. With purpose, most things are just weather. The modern trap is mistaking busyness for direction. We fill our schedules to capacity and call it ambition. But being busy is not the same as being purposeful. A hamster is busy. A hurricane is busy. Neither of them is going anywhere meaningful. Finding your firm purpose requires a question most people actively avoid. What am I actually for? Not what do you do? Not what do you earn? Not what do others expect of you? What are you for at the level of values, character, contribution? Write it down. Not as a vision board. Not as a 5-year plan. As a daily compass. A thing you return to when life offers you 10 distractions, and you need to know which one deserves your energy. When that exists, the chaos doesn't disappear. It just stops being in charge. Principle 2. Guard your mind like a gate. Think about the last time you mindlessly opened social media at 11 p.m. You were not looking for anything specific. You were tired, slightly bored, slightly restless. And 45 minutes later you set down your phone feeling vaguely worse than before, more anxious, more comparative, more aware of everything you supposedly lack. Nothing happened to you, and yet something was taken. Epictetus understood that the mind is not a passive receiver. It is a living environment. And like any environment, what you allow into it determines what grows there. The modern world is a masterclass in exploiting this vulnerability. Every notification is engineered to interrupt. Every headline is designed to agitate. Every algorithm is optimized to keep your nervous system slightly dysregulated, because a calm, focused person doesn't need to keep scrolling. Guarding your mind is not about becoming naive or sheltered. It is about being intentional rather than reactive about what you allow through the gate. A practical exercise. For 1 week, notice every time you feel worse after consuming something. A conversation. An article. A person's company. A news cycle. Notice it without judgment. Just observe the pattern. What you discover will tell you more about who is currently living rent-free in your mental space than any personality assessment ever could. Then start making choices. Not perfectly, just more deliberately than before. The person who guards their mind is not cold. They are not indifferent. They are simply the gatekeeper of the one thing they actually own. Principle 3. Handle criticism without losing yourself. Here is a social experiment worth running mentally. 2 colleagues receive the same piece of feedback from the same manager. Your presentation lacked structure. The first colleague goes home, replays the conversation 17 times, questions their entire career, sleeps badly, and arrives the next day defensive and withdrawn. The feedback has become a story about who they are. The second colleague writes down the feedback, considers whether it has merit, decides yes, their slides could be more organized, and emails the manager to ask for a 15-minute conversation about how to improve. The feedback remains what it was, information. Same words. Completely different internal outcomes. Epictetus was blunt about this. We cannot control what others say about us. We can only control what we do with it. The key insight that most people miss is that not all criticism deserves the same response. There are 3 types. Criticism that is true and useful. Take it. Apply it. Be grateful for it, even when it stings. This is the rarest and most valuable kind. Criticism that reflects the other person's own frustration, insecurity, or projection. Acknowledge it calmly, release it without absorbing it. It was never really about you. Criticism designed to diminish rather than improve. Set it down entirely. Not everything aimed at you is meant to help you grow. The Stoic practice is simple. Pause before you react. Ask, is this true? Ask, is this useful? Then respond from that place, not from the wound. Building this skill takes time. But the alternative, living at the mercy of every opinion, is far more expensive. Principle 4. Transform offense into understanding. Someone says something that cuts you. Your first instinct is to fire back, to defend, to build a case for why they are wrong and you're justified. And in some version of reality, maybe you are completely right about that. But Epictetus asks a harder question. What do you actually want from this moment? Because the way we typically handle offense, with anger, with retaliation, with the silent treatment, or the devastating comeback, rarely produces the outcome we actually want. It produces a momentary release followed by a longer-lasting damage to the relationship, to our own peace of mind, and often to our reputation. Transforming offense does not mean pretending it didn't happen. It means asking why it happened. Consider this. When someone is chronically unkind, it is almost never about you. The person who belittles others in meetings is managing their own fear of inadequacy. The person who sends the passive-aggressive message is expressing something they cannot yet say directly. The person who dismisses your work is operating from their own unexamined wounds. This is not an excuse. It is an explanation. And explanations create space where anger cannot survive. The most powerful thing you can do when someone offends you is to pause long enough to ask, what are they actually trying to protect right now? You will not always find a satisfying answer. But the act of asking shifts you from victim of their behavior to observer of a human pattern. And from that place, you can choose your response instead of simply having one. Forgiveness, in the Stoic sense, is not something you do for the other person. It is something you do for yourself, to stop carrying a weight that was never yours to begin with. Principle 5. Face fear and shame with precision. The fears that have the most power over us are almost never the ones we can name clearly. It is not public speaking that terrifies most people. It is the fear of being seen as incompetent, which is really the fear of being rejected, which is really the fear of being fundamentally unworthy of belonging. We fear the surface thing, but the surface thing is just the door. What lives behind it is much older. Epictetus knew that unexamined fear doesn't shrink with time, it grows. Every time we avoid the thing that frightens us, we teach our nervous system that the threat is real and dangerous. The avoidance becomes the problem. The Stoic practice is deliberate exposure combined with honest inquiry. When you feel fear, sit with the specific question, what exactly am I afraid will happen? Break it down to its most concrete form. I am afraid that if I speak in the meeting, someone will challenge my idea, and I won't have a good answer, and people will think I'm less capable than they assumed. Written out like that, the fear becomes manageable. Not because the scenario is impossible, it might happen, but because you can now prepare for it. And you can also see that even if it does happen, you will survive it. Shame works differently, but the antidote is similar. Shame says, I am the mistake. Guilt says, I made a mistake. The Stoics would have us live firmly in the second category. You are not your worst decision. You are the person capable of learning from it. The most corrosive thing about shame is how it lives in secrecy. When you bring it into the light, by naming it to yourself, by writing it out, by sharing it with someone you trust, it loses most of its power almost immediately. You are not your fear. You are not your shame. You are the one choosing what to do with them. Principle 6. Anticipate obstacles before they arrive. There is a reason Navy SEALs rehearse every scenario before they execute a mission. Not because they are pessimistic. Because preparation is the highest form of respect for reality. The Stoics had a practice called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. Before a significant event, you deliberately envision what could go wrong. Not to create anxiety, but to dissolve it. Here is how this plays out in modern life. Before a difficult conversation, ask yourself, what is the most likely way this goes sideways? What will I do if that happens? Before launching a project, ask, what are the 3 most probable obstacles? How will I handle each one? Before a major life change, ask, what am I most afraid might happen? Can I survive it if it does? This is not catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is dwelling on disaster without agency. Premeditation is imagining the difficulty while simultaneously planning the response. The result is that when the obstacle actually arrives, and it will, you are not surprised. You are not paralyzed. You have been here before, at least in your mind. There is also a deeper benefit that most people miss. When you genuinely face the worst-case scenario in your imagination and realize you could survive it, the fear of failure loses much of its grip. The obstacle is no longer a catastrophe lurking in the shadows. It is a known variable in a plan you have already thought through. Prepare not for the life you hope to have. Prepare for the life that actually happens. Principle 7. Build inner strength through deliberate response. The story we are usually told about strength is external. The strong person doesn't cry. The strong person doesn't show weakness. The strong person pushes through without visible effort. This is not strength. This is performance. Real inner strength, the kind Epictetus built as a slave with no possessions and no certainty, is the capacity to feel the full weight of a difficult moment and still choose your response rather than simply have one. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps, described the same discovery independently. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies human freedom. In that space lies growth and the power to choose our attitude. That space is what the Stoics spent their entire lives learning to inhabit and expand. In practical terms, this looks like: your partner says something cutting during an argument. You feel the familiar heat rise. And instead of immediately escalating, which is what your body wants to do, because your nervous system cannot tell the difference between a heated conversation and a physical threat, you pause. You breathe. You ask yourself, what response reflects the person I want to be in this relationship? Sometimes you still get it wrong. But over time, with practice, the pause becomes longer. The reactive impulse becomes quieter. The chosen response becomes more natural. This is not suppression. It is cultivation. The distinction matters enormously. Suppression buries emotion until it erupts. Cultivation observes emotion and decides how to channel it. One creates explosions. The other creates character. Your inner strength is built in the ordinary moments, not in the crises. It is built in every small choice to respond rather than react. Principle 8. Restrain action until clarity arrives. We live in an age that rewards speed over depth. Reply immediately. Decide fast. Move quickly. Hustle harder. And there are certainly contexts where speed matters. But the Stoics understood something our productivity culture has largely forgotten. The most expensive decisions are usually the ones made in a state of emotional activation. The email you fired off in frustration. The commitment you made to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. The relationship you ended or stayed in because you couldn't tolerate the uncertainty of waiting to see clearly. Epictetus taught that restraint is not weakness or indecision. It is the practice of creating space between impulse and action, and using that space to ask whether the action you are about to take is actually serving what you value. A simple test. When you feel the urgent need to respond, react, or decide immediately, ask yourself, will I feel the same urgency about this in 24 hours? In a week? If the answer is yes, act, but thoughtfully. If the answer is probably not, wait. Most emotional emergencies are not actually emergencies. They are our nervous systems, trained by modern life to treat everything as urgent, applying that urgency to situations that simply require time. The ability to delay action also builds a particular kind of character that is increasingly rare, the person who can tolerate discomfort and uncertainty without immediately reaching for resolution. That person makes better decisions, builds deeper relationships, and is far harder to manipulate because they cannot be rushed. Patience is not passivity. It is precision. Principle 9. Practice the power of acceptance. This is the principle most misunderstood and most necessary. When most people hear acceptance, they hear surrender. They imagine lying down in the road and letting life drive over them. They assume the Stoics are asking them to stop caring stop fighting, stop trying. That is not what acceptance means. Not even close. Acceptance means refusing to add unnecessary suffering on top of necessary suffering. Here is the distinction in practice. You lose your job. That is painful. The pain is real, proportional, and completely valid. That is necessary suffering. It is the appropriate emotional response to a real loss. Now you spend 3 weeks replaying the moment you were let go, imagining all the things you should have said, catastrophizing about your entire future, beating yourself up for past decisions, and lying awake at night arguing with a version of your former boss who exists only in your head. That is unnecessary suffering. The job is gone. The boss's opinion is gone. The moment is gone. But you have kept it alive and turned it into something far more damaging than the original event. Acceptance is the decision to feel the loss fully without adding the 10 extra stories your mind wants to pile on top of it. It is not, this doesn't hurt. It is, this hurts, and I am not going to make it hurt twice as much by fighting the fact that it happened. In the modern world, this matters most in the gap between what we expected and what we got. The relationship that didn't work out. The promotion that went to someone else. The project that failed after months of effort. Acceptance doesn't ask you to celebrate these. It asks you to stop fighting a past you cannot change, so you can direct your energy toward a future you still can. That is not resignation. That is strategy. Principle 10. Live according to your true nature. This is the deepest principle and the hardest to fake your way through. The Stoics believe that every human being has a logos, a rational nature, a governing purpose, an essential way of being in the world that is uniquely theirs. Living according to nature meant living in alignment with that essential self, not the self others needed you to be, not the self you performed for social approval, but the self that actually existed underneath the performance. The modern world makes this extraordinarily difficult because the modern world is, above all else, a machine for producing conformity disguised as choice. You are given thousands of options about what to wear, where to eat, and which streaming platform to use. But the options around who to be are significantly more constrained. There is still enormous social pressure, in workplaces, in families, in social media, to be a particular kind of person. Productive, agreeable, aspirational, visible. And most people, without ever consciously deciding to, build a life around the person others are most comfortable with them being. The Stoics would call this a profound form of self-betrayal, not dramatic, not intentional, but devastating over time. Living according to your nature requires, first, the willingness to know your nature. What actually matters to you when no one is watching? What work feels like expression rather than performance? What relationships feel like home rather than obligation? What do you do when you have no external reward or recognition for doing it? The answers to those questions are pointing at something true. Then comes the harder part, building your life around those answers, slowly, imperfectly, without waiting for permission. You will not get it right immediately. Living according to your nature is not a state you arrive at. It is a direction you continue to choose, especially in the moments when conforming would be easier, when silence would be safer, when shrinking would cost you less in the short term. The Stoics were clear. A life lived in alignment with your true nature is more peaceful, more resilient, and more meaningful than any life built on what others expected of you, no matter how much external success that expected life brings. You came here as something specific. The work is to keep returning to that, and to stop apologizing for it. Final words, the space between. Everything we have covered today comes back to the same discovery that Epictetus made in a cell with no possessions and no power. The external world has access to almost everything about your life. Your schedule, your money, your relationships, your reputation, your health. But it cannot reach the space between stimulus and response. It cannot enter the place where you decide what something means to you and how you are going to meet it. That space is yours. It has always been yours. And no one, no circumstance, no criticism, no loss, no failure can take it without your permission. The 10 principles in this video are all, at their core, different ways of learning to live inside that space, to inhabit it more fully, to expand it, to stop surrendering it reflexively to whoever or whatever arrives demanding your reaction. This is not about becoming unmovable. It is about becoming unbreakable. There is a difference. The unmovable person has closed themselves off. They feel nothing, risk nothing, connect with nothing. The unbreakable person feels everything. They grieve. They love. They fail and try again. They are moved, deeply moved, by the things that matter. They simply cannot be destroyed by them. That is what Stoicism offers. Not a life without pain. A life without unnecessary surrender. Start with one principle. Practice it for a week. Notice what shifts. The transformation does not announce itself. It accumulates. And one day, in the middle of something that would have broken the old you, you will notice that you are still standing. That will tell you everything. Which of these 10 principles do you need most right now? Name it in the comments. The answer might surprise you.